Hello everybody, Brian Whelan's the name. You've heard me maybe 4 weeks ago, and as Seamus said, I came down with a real bad case of the flu. Was out of action for maybe 3.5 weeks. I want to say a special thanks to JJ Murphy who helped me out during that difficult time. And but I'm back like a bad penny, and I talked the last night I was here about just general remarks about energy, a critique of windmills, if you heard me, and electric cars, and I talked about generally alternative energy, and tonight I wanted to talk about free energy. Can I ask for a hands up? Has anyone heard of free energy? Or? Okay, well, you know, I would expect people here have. General public have not heard of it. It's not an easy subject to talk about, to introduce to the general public, because you're talking about technology that basically doesn't make sense through conventional science. And I was introduced 11 years ago to the concept of water as a fuel, which I had an open mind on, and it's really important to have an open mind when you're researching alternative energies, particularly free energy. Because if you have a closed mind and you don't believe it works, you won't do the required research to start with. And a fair percentage of the general public have closed minds, or at least that's my opinion. And it's whatever they've been told, the authorities told them. They take authority as the truth instead of taking truth as the authority. So I want to make a start anyway. First of all, free energy is something that's been known about for 100 years, well over 100 years, going back to John Keely's water hammer. There are certain sites online that deal with the technology, but there's only a handful of them, and it's not the easiest concept to get your head around. So I say with free energy, the energy is mostly free, but the device that makes it is not free. It's something people forget, you know, because people think free energy, the Galactic Federation of Light. Well, no, you have to buy the device that makes the free energy, and you need to understand how it works. And maybe you could sell it, or you could instruct other people how it works, you know. I'm going to go through a series of obstacles as regards why free energy is not available, and I start off with the general public. And I'm not beating up on the general public, but just that most of them do not know that there is such a thing as zero-point energy or free energy. And the vast majority of people are not aware that free energy exists, and therefore there is no political pressure to see it brought into being. And number two, I have, of those that are told that free energy exists, many believe there is no such thing. The authorities would have told them, you can't get something for nothing. And number three, of the people who have an open mind and are at least able to accept that maybe we don't understand everything, an infinitesimal number of such people will do the required research to at least have some kind of understanding of how free energy technology works. And number four, of those that have an insight and are prepared to do the development research, there will need to be some kind of funding. If they don't have funding themselves, which is often the case, who will fund the development work? Something I can relate to. And number five, assuming an individual has the funding and has done the required research and has started to build a prototype and has gotten to the prototype to run at least seemingly in an over-unity manner. Over-unity is a term used in free energy devices. It's basically there's energy going in, but there's more excess energy, because there has to be excess energy coming out in order to be rightly thought of as a free energy device. Many of these devices will be shown to not be truly over unity, or some kind of deliberate deception may be taking place. And sometimes inventors get desperate, you know, and they will try to hoodwink people. You know, that has happened, you know. But, you know, so we'll assume the inventor has gotten over all these hurdles and have their free energy device running and has been certified as a genuine free energy. The inventor will look to file patents, as they consider the vast money that these patents will deliver when their technology is put into commercial production. In the US, many of these patents have been confiscated by the Patent Office. The official line will be, these patents represent a threat to the industrial base of the United States. Cease and desist this work immediately. And I think there could be 2,500 patents suppressed by the Patent Office in the United States. A lot of my research relates to the United States. Occasionally, inventors will get through these formidable hurdles and their free energy devices observed to be genuine. The inventors will surely require funding to put their technology into commercial production, or more likely commercial licensing agreement will be sought. And individuals will come forward offering huge sums of money, yet the device will never go into commercial production. At least I've never heard of one going into commercial production. The inventor is paid off to shelve the technology, or if they are not prepared to be paid off, they may be murdered. The medical examiner will say the inventor died of a heart attack, and the police will say there's nothing to see here. And the end result is a funeral. Distraught relations of the inventor and state institutions will continue as if nothing has happened. This is why free energy doesn't exist. And I just make the comment here, if researching free energy, please keep in mind that mainstream media treats it as pseudo-science. It contradicts the laws of thermodynamics. These laws couldn't be wrong, of course, and they believe this. Such people take authority as the truth instead of taking truth as the authority. Free energy devices do not pollute and even have health-giving properties, and I'll talk about that later. I chose 3 areas of free energy to talk about, and one of them is cold fusion, people might have heard of, which is now known as LENR, which is low energy nuclear reaction. And the second is the work of Nikola Tesla, and the third is water as a fuel, which I have done more than read up on. I've done a lot of basic research and experimentation with it. So cold fusion, LENR, is a technology that uses nuclear reaction as opposed to a chemical reaction. A safe nuclear reaction is eminently more desirable because of the vast energy that is being tapped into by using hydrogen rather than uranium or plutonium, which are huge atoms which give off radiation. Hydrogen, LENR, does not give off radiation. Hydrogen is the first element of the periodic table. Now, I talked last night about hydrogen being an energy carrier, and what we're finding is these cutting-edge companies who are involved in cold fusion are using hydrogen as what they're starting with. They're not using any other element. So basically, in 1989 at the University of Utah, 2 scientists, Dr. Stanley Pons and Dr. Martin Fleischmann, were 2 electrochemists who were based at the university. One, Dr. Martin Fleischmann, was German, and they had an experiment running over the weekend, and a lab assistant looked in on it, and they found that the experiment had burnt a hole on the top of the bench that it was sitting on, and that shouldn't have happened. And that basically started a period in alternative energy that was unprecedented, because the 2 scientists I think they were being pushed by the University of Utah to go public about it. Now, that was probably a mistake. They should have done more research. Now, I'm not saying these were bad scientists or anything like that. I think they were excellent scientists, but cold fusion was in its infancy at that time, and it is 33 years later, and it's still not in commercial production. And you know, a cynic might say, well, come on, for God's sake, if it's not in commercial production 33 years later, what's going on? So the University of Utah, I believe, pushed the 2 scientists to go forward with it, and other institutions, the bigger ones like University of Texas A&M and MIT, which is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they attempted to replicate. Some of the smaller companies replicated it, no problem. Others did and didn't, and the bigger ones seemingly had trouble replicating it. It's very hard to get to the truth about cold fusion or LENR because it depends on who you're talking about. The people behind it tend to speak positively about it, and not surprisingly, the people who see it as competition speak negatively about it. And this is going on 33 years, and I don't blame the general public for being cynical. But what happened was they announced this to the world. They had press conferences, and this went all around the world. And I do recall reading, in 1990 maybe about cold fusion, and it was being titled as a new energy paradigm for humanity. That's how big they were placing it. But you might say, well, what happened? Well, as I said, trying to get to the truth is not the easiest, but what I think it happens, they couldn't always replicate the experiment, and that's a big no-no. If you haven't got a technology that you can't replicate each and every time, you have to sort out that problem before you start going public about it. And what happened was, it just, the two scientists were ridiculed heavily, Dr. Martin Fleischmann and Dr. Stanley Pons. And some say that's the reason Dr. Stanley Pons, Dr. Martin Fleischmann, who was German, died before his time. But the idea behind cold fusion was not fake or fraud. They just didn't fully understand the science. And, it's... hot fusion is another thing you need to know. Now, there's big books on hot fusion, and all establishment cartels are involved, and there's millions, probably billions of euros. I was watching a video on YouTube there last week about hot fusion factory, whatever you want to call it, research facility, and they had spent millions, hundreds of millions, maybe billions on it, and they hadn't said hot fusion is going to be the future, but the truth of the matter is hot fusion has never successfully worked. I think maybe it worked for 1/100 of a second. That's as much as they've ever got it to work. But there's big money involved. If you're on tenure there at a university, you can get very well paid there all your working life for a technology that doesn't work. Of course, nobody says that. So cold fusion got a bad name. It became a term for pink elephant, or something outrageously expensive that doesn't work, and it became ridiculed to high heaven by the media. And it got, subsequently the people behind it changed the name to LENR, which is low energy nuclear reaction. And at that stage, an Italian entrepreneur, Andre Rossi, with his ECAT, his company was named the Leonardo Corporation. Now, this thing runs like a soap opera, people entering the array and promoting their product, but yet it never seems to get to commercial production. Now, some people might say, well, come on, maybe there was suppression. I don't think there was suppression. There was, because there was a lot of mainstream companies involved in this, and still are. So I'll just read out what, part of the monologue as regards Andre Rossi, who was Italian with his ECAT. His company was named the Leonardo Corporation. According to third-party validators from the University of Bologna, the ECAT apparatus had yielded up to 3 times the energy coming out to that which was put in trials. An investor named Tom Darden, CEO of Cherokee Investments, invested 16 million based on the ECAT testing over a limited time frame, and a final payment of $89 million would be paid based on an extended testing phase of the ECAT, Rossi's company, which is Leonardo Corporation. The second lengthy phase would require the ECAT showing at least a COP, that's a coefficient of performance of 6. Now that's 6 times more energy coming out than was going in. That is producing 6 times more energy. As I say, the second test would entail building a 1 megawatt plant installed at a customer's premise, and that customer was Johnson Matthey. And this part of the testing apparently went well with ECAT, showing a COP of at least 6 and sometimes up to 50 times. And the customer, Johnson Matthey, was so impressed they ordered 3 more 1 megawatt ECATs. And Cherokee Investments were supposed to pay their final $89 million to receive their license for North America. Industrial Heat, which is this Cherokee Investments company, said they didn't believe the independent validators report and refused to pay up. Rossi Company's Leonardo Corporation took Industrial Heat, which was Tom Darden's company, to court, and Leonardo Corporation claimed that the Industrial Heat had stolen Leonardo's intellectual property. Like this, it's a potboiler, it's a soap opera. I don't know who's telling the truth there, because it depends on who you're listening to, whether they're speaking positively or negatively about it. Another company that's probably a bit more high caliber was Brilliant Energy. And Brilliant Energy have brought LENR to an advanced stage, I believe. Robert Good is President, Chief Technical Officer. What is Brilliant Energy's method of generating LENR? The key component of Brilliant reactor consists of a cylindrical stainless steel metal rod which has been sequentially coated with thin concentric layers of various metals. And this rod is also called a core and is fundamental to the design of Brilliant Energy's system. The outer layer of the core is nickel, and it is in this layer that the LENR reaction takes place. Hydrogen is absorbed into the nickel layer, and after a very short duration, high-powered electromagnetic pulses is repetitively applied to the nuclei, which are protons, and they undergo a sequence of nuclear reactions. The net result is that 4 hydrogen nuclei end up yielding 1 helium nucleus plus energy, and which can be extracted from the core in the form of heat for useful purposes. Another company is formerly known as Black Light Power, which is now Brilliant Light Power, which is headed up by Dr. Randall Mills, who was a medical doctor. Another contributor to the development of cold fusion type processes, Dr. Randall Mills, who through his company Black Light Power, which is now known as Brilliant Light Power. Dr. Mills is a trained medical doctor who has been working with hydrogen electrolyzed from water to tap into the energy of this energy carrier. Attempting to explain what is happening in this process is difficult, as scientists and Dr. Mills have different theories, and if they don't understand it, I surely don't understand it. But it's basically they're tapping into the nucleus of hydrogen, and they're basically releasing huge quantities of energy. And Dr. Mills has assembled a high-level team into his company, and they have funding. That's significant. When they have funding, that's something that somebody has looked at that technology and thinks there must be something to it. I would think this would not be likely if there was nothing in the form of test data to prove the technology works. Yet when I go onto their company website, there is little in the form of licensing out the technology, although there have been some North America seems to be particularly slow to update this technology. Why? The same applies to Brilliant Energy. Why? And in North America, where I lived for 8 years, North America is, it's always called a great democracy and all, and it's the most controlled society in the Western world. There's 17 intelligence agencies in it. The most offensive is the CIA, and they basically keep tabs on everyone. And FBI, whatever, there's a whole bunch of them. And it is, it's considered the home of innovation and technology in America, but yet there's no uptake of it. I think maybe South Korea has one company in South Korea, and maybe one in Canada has uptaken it. And this is a simple example because people get bogged down with technical level of this technology, and it's not that hard to figure. An example of how much energy is in hydrogen LENR. Take the volume of a pencil eraser. Okay, the amount of water that would occupy a pencil eraser, right? What we used to call a rubber in school. You can't use that term anymore, but and 76 gallons of gasoline, right? That's the difference. So a water eraser, the space that would occupy in water, and 76 gallons of gasoline, that's how much energy is involved. Okay, LENR is a technology that could change things for the people at a much lower cost and little or no pollution, but there is a huge established industry that are able to exert influence to slow its progress. The technology could be set up in individual households, and this is things I think people here might be interested. This is not centralized government control. This is where you buy the device, you put it in maybe, I don't know, a spare room, small spare room, and it runs day and night. It kicks in and maybe charges a bank of batteries or whatever, and it stops, kicks in maybe 4 hours later and charges the same battery, and you effectively have, you have to arguably free energy there to a large extent, and there's no pollution, and There's no bills from the ESB every month or 2 months, you know. They're putting them up like crazy now. And people if people get behind this, you know, they can have this technology, you know. I think it's particularly suited to households or offices, because in my own research in using the water, you'd be running a home generator, which is quite noisy, you know. Okay, you could put mufflers on it, and you could put it 10 feet down and underground, but you know, in an urban setting, that's not really feasible. The LENR would probably make more sense. So I go on to the work of Nikola Tesla. Tesla is an important figure in the alternative energy, but he worked on free energy too a lot of his life, and that's the reason he's not known, because he wasn't part of the boys' club. He wasn't part of the establishment. And I'll just make a start here. Nikola Tesla was born in what was Austrian-Hungarian Empire, what is today's Smiljan, Croatia. His father was an Orthodox priest. His mother had a talent for making handcrafted tools, and Tesla said he got his talents from his mother's side of the family. Nikola's father wanted him to become a pastor, as he himself was, but Nikola was not interested in religious studies and feigned sickness for several years, I believe, until his father recanted and allowed him to attend engineering school. So Nikola studied at the Rashosh, Karlstadt, and also at the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Austria, and finally at the University of Prague. And Nikola was also worked in Budapest, Hungary. Nikola decided to emigrate to the US in 1884, as it was a country which was embracing innovation in electricity. Now, in the United States, you know, they do tend to be the home of innovation. You have Karl Benz with his car there in Germany, which would become later known as Mercedes-Benz. And you had Ford a few years later with his Model T, and it must have been a very dynamic time to be alive for the ordinary people who had grew up around horses and all, you know, terribly, you know, difficult way of getting around and no energy, and it must have been really a strange time for people. But I continue. Tesla arrived in New York penniless because somebody had relieved him of his meager funds on the boat coming over, and he had a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison. Now, Thomas Edison was the guy behind direct current electricity, and he was a big name, and he was part of the establishment, and I don't think he was the great inventor they made him out to be. He supposedly tried 100 different materials for filament light before I think he finally figured out tungsten. I think the tungsten is the best for it. Tesla met with Edison because he had a letter of introduction to Edison, and Edison asked him could he fix a technical problem Edison was having with his DC motor, and he offered Tesla, you know, whatever it was, $5,000 or something, I believe it was, which was a considerable sum at the time, and Tesla promptly went ahead and solved the problem, but Edison wouldn't pay him because he said, Mr. Tesla, you don't understand our American sense of humor. So Tesla promptly left the building. He went back to digging ditches in New York, something I can relate to myself because I did a bit of it, more than a bit of it myself in the 80s. And he got talking to the foreman on the company that he was working for. I think they were digging for cables of some type or another, and he explained that he had been working on alternating current, which Edison in his mind could see was the future, because Tesla could see as the future, because Tesla was one of these people that would play out actual videos in his mind of how a machine would work. And Thomas Edison was pushing his DC at the time, and when he got to understand that Tesla was working on alternative energy, he saw that as a huge threat, which it was, and because he was part of the establishment and had money, he would put on scenes in New York City to show the dangers of alternating current. One stage they electrocuted an elephant, you know, lovely person, and what would happen was that there would be wars eventually between Tesla and Edison as the AC-DC paradigm was fought over, and of course Tesla won because AC clearly has its advantages and can carry electricity long distance that DC can't do. Move on here. George Westinghouse was a significant individual in manufacturing in New Jersey in the time that Tesla was there. He had made his start with, he had invented air brakes for the rail industries because the existing rail brakes were very poor standard, and he was making significant inroads and became very successful. But he was also interested, you know, he was an inventor himself, George Westinghouse, but also an entrepreneur, and he was very interested in learning more about the work of Nikola Tesla and his AC. Basically, the two men got together and they done a deal, and you know, Tesla would be paid such and such an amount for licensing out the technology to Westinghouse, and the two got on fairly well, as opposed to he never got on with Edison, and because Westinghouse had a vision of the future, and he saw AC, alternating current electricity, playing a big part in it. And the AC was clearly a superior technology for transporting electricity, but Edison had committed his resources to developing his DC current and put his money into challenging the AC created by Tesla. You know, I mentioned this before. Unfortunately for Edison, the Westinghouse Corporation was chosen to supply the lighting to the 1893 World's Columbia Exposition in Chicago, and Tesla conducted demonstrations of his AC system there. These were big things at the time, these world fairs that were held in some of the major cities like Chicago, and literally millions of people would go to them, and there would be expositions of technology of the time. Tesla was the man that came up with the idea of using hydroelectric power for Niagara Falls, so that you have this waterfall, giant waterfall, which could turn a turbine which would generate the AC, which would be brought down to Buffalo in New York. And that was the first town, I think, maybe in the world to be electrified, and that was 1895. Just as